Now, I've only been here a year, and I try to keep this personality trait a secret, but I am highly competitive. So this past week, when Eric climbed a rock formation, I had to do it too. I love a challenge. And as I was preparing for worship this upcoming year, I decided to challenge myself. This book of books, how many people have ever heard a sermon about Obadiah or Nahum? I haven't. So I thought, what if I preach on every book of the Bible? I could definitely take on this challenge. However, there is a problem, kids, because I don't mean kids to the adults, I mean to the little kids. I'm trying to get their attention. This book has 66 books in it. And the calendar of our year has how many weeks? 52. So 66 does not equal 52. In order to make this work, I need to combine some of the books. So I decided maybe 1st and 2nd Kings I can preach together. 1st and 2nd Chronicles. The letters of John, there were 3 of them. Why not shove them together? They're short. I also decided if I'm going to preach through the entire Bible in 1 year, that I probably should not go chronologically in order. So if you decide to do a year-long reading plan, I'm going to jump around. It's for your sake and mine, because I don't want to preach about the prophets for 4 months straight. I've decided to break it up. And we're going to start with just the first 5 books of the Bible. Last week, Lee finished our sermon series about Genesis chapter 1, and he included John chapter 1, the gospel, so I'm going to say we did Genesis and John so far. Today I'm going to preach about Exodus, and we'll move through this Pentateuch. Pentateuch, for you who love Greek, means 5 parts. The first 5 books of the Bible are called the Pentateuch. Everyone say Pentateuch. You will probably never need to say that again. But if you need a password on your computer, you could use it. We'll go through the Pentateuch, and then we will jump to some letters. We'll go back and forth. You should mark on your calendar Valentine's Day, because I will be in a month of wisdom literature then, and I will preach on Song of Songs. I'm not going to describe it right now because we have all ages here. But come to church on Valentine's week. Having introduced you now to the Bible challenge that I am really actually quite excited about, regardless of how the kids feel. Exodus. Exodus is the 2nd book of the Bible, and most of the story is about the great deliverance, the exodus of the Israelite people from slavery in Egypt. How did they get there? We jumped over that. In Genesis, beside the origin stories of our ancestors in faith, there are also stories about these large families. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, these patriarchs who had many children. And you can read in Genesis about how they fought. It'll make you feel good about your own kids. Hopefully, I hope it does. Jacob, this last patriarch, has 12 sons. And Joseph, the youngest, is sold into slavery by his brothers. I told you it would make you feel better about your own kids. It's a terrible thing. Kids, don't get any ideas. Joseph is enslaved in Egypt, but he rises up through the ranks, and he catches Pharaoh, who is like the king or the president. He catches his attention. Pharaoh respects him and gives him a high position of authority, and Joseph is able to bring his family during a famine when they had nothing to eat. Come to Egypt, where we will be okay. Time passes. Power switches hands. A new Pharaoh doesn't care about Joseph nor his family, and he enslaves the Israelite people. They're enslaved for a couple hundred years, and that's where Exodus picks up. Because Moses is the adopted son of Pharaoh. You may remember this story. Moses' mother, who was an Israelite, puts him in a basket to save his life and puts him in the river when they were trying to get rid of all the babies. Pharaoh's daughter finds the basket, opens it, and there's a baby inside. So she adopts this Hebrew baby. He grows as a son of Pharaoh, but realizes that his ancestors, his biological ancestors, are the ones who are enslaved. And at the burning bush, he hears God say, I'm choosing you to go and lead my people out of Egypt to freedom. This is the epic story in Exodus. If you haven't read it recently, I encourage you to do it. How did they escape all the plagues? It's something children learn in Sunday school. Afterwards, Moses and the people wonder, how can we live together as free people? How can we be community? And Moses receives the 10 Commandments. Raise your hand if you remember that story. 10 Commandments. Honor God, or respect God. Respect your parents. Don't lie. Don't murder. I should really preach on those, right? It's important. But what I want to do today is not preach about the most important story of Exodus, which is the deliverance of the oppressed people, which has inspired the civil rights movement, the abolitionist movement. So many people who are oppressed are inspired by that. That's not what I'm preaching on today, and I'm not preaching on the 10 Commandments. I want to preach on a story you probably haven't heard before our readers just read it. This story of Moses catching a break, having the opportunity to see his wife and kids after that crazy adventure. When his father-in-law says, let us come out and meet you, tell us what has been going on. You've had these type of conversations before, right? Can you imagine hearing someone say, I saw this burning bush, and God spoke to me, and I freed people out of Egypt from my adopted father's power. There were plagues and frogs and bugs and blood. Oh my. Oh. Jethro sits there listening to the story and says, you know, in spite of our culture saying there are so many gods, I believe that the God you're describing is the real one, because who else could do all of that? Then they relax, they go to bed, and the next morning when Jethro wakes up, Moses is already back at work. He works from morning until night like some of you do. And Jethro said to him, what are you doing with all these people around you? Moses explained, they come to me with their problems. When there's a conflict, people ask me what God might want them to do, so I try and help them understand maybe what God is wanting them, how God is wanting them to resolve the conflict. Jethro, his father-in-law, offers unsolicited advice. What you're doing is terrible. I don't know about you, but I would be a little offended if my father-in-law said that to me. However, it was a different society, and Moses listened. Jethro said, there's a better way you could do this, because you're going to burn out. If you are the only one solving all their problems, you're going to burn out. You don't have the energy to work from morning till night like this every day, helping everyone, in spite of your best intentions. Why don't you recognize who might be trustworthy, who you would be willing to share responsibilities with? You could teach them what to do, and then they could take care of the minor problems. You could still take care of the big ones. All the work would get done, and everyone could have peace. Moses thought about it and thought, that's actually really good advice. And so he tried it, and it succeeded. He was able to find people he trusted. He was able to teach them what to do and share the responsibility, and the scripture says they all were at peace. Rachel Held Evans is an author, was an author. She died this year, which is so sad. Can you show the quote she has? Faithful engagement with Scripture isn't about uncovering a singular moralistic point to every text and then sticking to it. Rather, the very nature of the biblical text invites us to consider the possibilities. Today's sermon is not a sermon about morality or ethics. It's not a sermon that tells you should do this and you shouldn't do that. This is a sermon about the possibilities that we have in life. What if we too considered Jethro's advice so that we would have a sense of peace and the people around us would have a sense of peace? Is it possible that the many things that each one of us does every day could be shared? That perhaps if we find trustworthy people and if we teach them what we think needs to be done, that by sharing the responsibility, all the work gets done without anyone burning out. Now we're at the start of a school year, new schedules, new procedures, new expectations. Not just for students and teachers, but also any of us can take a moment to consider how we spend our energy. What could we do? Is it possible? Would we want to? Maybe we don't want to, and that's okay. But if you want to avoid burnout and you think you might get there this year, what can you do to change the situation just up front before the school year begins? If you're caring for kids, maybe you teach them how to make their own lunches or do their laundry, whatever is appropriate for their maturity level. Or perhaps at your job, maybe you find a way to hire other people to share the responsibilities or just shift expectations a little bit so that your employees don't burn out either. Or if you're at home taking care of aging parents, maybe you could offer to get help, allow yourself to get help. It's not a bad thing. I think that the advice from Moses' father-in-law is timeless. It's okay to delegate. It's okay to share responsibilities so that we can all be at peace and still accomplish what needs to be accomplished. This morning, YK is going to play for a time of reflection, and it's your time to think your own thoughts. Sometimes we just need space to clear our heads. And as the school year approaches, I ask you to open yourself up to the many possibilities of peace that can begin with you.